Central Conference, we have two superstars in the making, two of our church planters, two folks that have come and given new blood to the Central Conference in the last year or so. And I wanted to introduce you to both Jay Catanus and EJ Ravago. Say hi, guys.
What's up?
Good morning.
How's it going?
You're both pastors, and the reason that they call you in today is because I want the Central Conference to know who you are. You both do great ministry. I've had the opportunity to visit your church, Jay, and preach, and I just loved being with you. And with you, EJ, I've had the opportunity to meet your leadership team and just discern next steps in your church, and I just love them as well. So I would like the whole Central Conference to know who you are. Why don't we start with you, Jay? Tell us a little bit about your church, where you meet, etc.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Reverend Danny. So I am Jay Catanus, the lead pastor and church planter for Garden City Covenant Church. We meet in Jefferson Park right now at a Chicago public school called Hitch Elementary School. And we are approaching our third anniversary this coming September. So our second anniversary, Reverend Danny was kind enough to visit us and also to bring his mothers, which is a special treat for us. I was very honored that he would consider us to be a place he was comfortable to bring his mom. So that was a special treat for us, but we're so thankful to partner with the Central Conference and with the ECC. We've been a part of the ECC technically for just over a year now, and it has been really, really great. Our church is small, there are about 50 of us, and we are growing slowly but surely. We're about 60% Filipino American, and the rest of our church is a mixture of other Latino, Asian American, and Caucasian, and other folks who live all over the place, but we're kind of a regional church as of now. But yeah, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Now, you have I consider your church multicultural. How many cultures do you have represented in your church?
You know, I mean, in terms of even the languages that are spoken, it could be about 6 right now. But cultures, depending on how we include some of our white folks' ethnic cultures, then we would have a lot, maybe up in a dozen or so.
Wow. Well, I loved it. I loved it. And you're married and you have 2 little boys?
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, always got to acknowledge my much, much better half. My wife, Lynn, is a teacher in middle school in Skokie, and our 2 sons, Noah is age 4 and Michael, or Mikey, is 1.5.
Yeah. Wow. That's wonderful. Now, EJ, tell us a little bit about your church.
All right. First, I want to say I'm glad this is happening because I am not Jay Catanus. All right.
So we can dismiss that myth,
Yeah.
right?
So now, so now the Central Conference will know there's 2 of us.
Wow.
I know we have, very similar stories, so it's very easy to confuse us. But yeah, Pastor EJ Ravago, New Abbey Covenant Church, all the way up north from you guys, in downtown Waukegan. And we've been going for 3 and some years. We'll be approaching 4 years in September. And just like Jay, I mean, our ethos is pretty much the same as far as our church is concerned. Multi-ethnicity is a value that is something we are trying to strive for and establish. Yeah, we're about 50 people too. I mean, depending who you count. I mean, if we count the once a quarter people, maybe 75. But those who are there consistently, 40 to 50 people. We're growing slow but surely. Married, 3 kids. Taylor, he's 7. Natalie's 5, and Camden is 1.5. And me and my wife have been married for, it's going to be 10 years. And Julielle's a nurse at Lake Forest, Northwestern Lake Forest.
That's wonderful. I know that our director of church planting, Debbie Griffith, has visited your church, and she was just blown away by the diversity and the way that you worship. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us who you have represented there.
We're about 70% Filipino, and then 30% other, Hispanic, other Asians, and some Caucasian or Anglo brothers and sisters. And, on another level of diversity is our denominational background. So, our space is open for a bunch of different types of Christians. And we make that clear that New Abbey is like a medium for both Catholics and Protestants. And so you might have some people in our church that still identify as Catholic, but are very comfortable and feel at home at the New Abbey worship service. So yeah, I mean, that's us in a nutshell.
One thing that I've found in Latin America is that Latin Americans don't really consider Catholics Christian. And is that the same thing in the Philippines? Is that the Filipino culture?
That's exactly the
Okay.
Same thing. Yep.
Well, I love what you're doing because I used to do the same thing. There was a Catholic family that used to come to one of my church plants, and I would always introduce them. This is our Catholic family that's meeting here with us. We welcome Catholics, we love Catholics, and etc. Until one day, maybe a year after they started coming, they came up to me and they said, "Yeah, we're not Catholic anymore." So don't introduce us like that anymore. But I love that because it's just, we're trying to, sometimes we, instead of being, stepping stones, we're stumbling blocks, right? And we're just saying, oh, no, this is for everyone. The church is for everyone, and our job is to draw people closer to Christ. And, I'm glad that you're doing that. Thank you for doing that. That takes a mature, but also a focused pastor to do that. So I have the privilege to have spent time with both of you. I know that justice is really important in your heart. Tell us, how are you pastoring your church right now in the time of COVID? I know that not only are you multicultural, you're also socially very diverse. You have people with means and people without means, as most of our minority churches do. Tell us, how are you doing through COVID? How are you taking care of yourselves? How are you taking care of your churches at this time?
Maybe I can go first then. So this pandemic of COVID-19 has definitely impacted our church because we have such a large share of Filipino Americans who are either in healthcare themselves or are living with family members who are in healthcare. So they are exposed in a disproportionately greater way to contracting the virus, and that has actually happened within our church. So just yesterday, actually, sadly, we celebrated the life, but also had to say goodbye to the father of one of our young ladies at church who contracted the virus. Their whole family, several of them in the household contracted it, but the mother is a healthcare worker. And through that, the father contracted the virus, and he was not able to fully recover, and eventually he did succumb to that. But we've had several people in the church who have been afraid to do their jobs, several people who have been worried and gotten sick, gotten tested. Many have, of course, come out negative, but others have tested positive. And so right now we do have another family whose parents, their mother is a healthcare worker, and the father and the mother are both right now positive and sick with COVID. And my wife also lost her grandfather as well. So when this began for us and really affected our meetings and our daily life, it was mid-March. And that was already very difficult, but added on to that and the experience that many Asian American people had of being stereotyped and biased against and even discriminated against or harassed for bringing the Wuhan flu or the Kung flu or the other things that, unfortunately political leaders were using to stereotype Asian Americans and Filipino Americans. Many of them experienced that as well. The historic violence against Black people and brown people from the state has resurfaced again as like a second pandemic. And so we've been really taxed to do our part and try to answer the call of our sisters and brothers in African American churches and communities and step up, march alongside them and speak alongside them in solidarity. And that the two fronts of pandemics have been very, very taxing for us today. So right now we're in a season where We're just trying to make sure that everybody is safe and healthy and everybody is well from week to week. It really is touch and go. But we're also trying to always be mindful then that so many in our city and our community, even in our own church, are losing jobs. We've had 3 job losses as well. So 3 families who've lost one of their incomes. So I'm amazed by our church and blessed by them that in the midst of all we're going through, they're showing up at marches, they're giving away their money, they're feeding their neighbors, they're donating blood, they're showing up to drop off supplies and care for each other, and speaking up in social media for Black lives, etc., even though they themselves are suffering, or perhaps because they themselves know the experience of suffering and of finding solidarity and unity among fellow Christians, that there's been strength, and I'm encouraged by that.
How about you, EJ?
Yeah, a big part of our ethos and church culture, especially as a church plant, was togetherness and presence. And, for us, it was a big adjustment from going, meeting twice a week at least, and then to nothing. It was hard, especially for me. I'm not going to lie. It was a very big adjustment, and I was just scraping and just kind of grinding through and, convincing myself that this was the next best thing. But we've grown into it. We've tweaked our mind to say this is a loving way to be together by not being together, because COVID is very real. Like what Jay said, for the Filipino community especially, a lot of us are in healthcare. My wife's a nurse, and we have 6 other nurses in our community, in our church, and then in PCTs. And so we haven't had any people with COVID at our church, but we know people who've passed, and we've known people who got really sick. And so COVID-19 is very real. I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories, whatever, but we're on the front lines, and we see this all the time. At least we know a person or families like once removed from our immediate circles who, again, have experienced death, especially in Waukegan. And so, by us doing this Zoom stuff and online stuff and social media is a loving thing to do. But we're making it work. Obviously, I can't wait till we can meet in person, but we are taking our time. A lot of our millennials are feeling it a lot more. I know, like across the board almost, many of them have mental health issues, and I think a lot of this downtime has just made it a little bit worse. And so, a lot of times I don't feel like I'm doing enough to kind of pass her alongside, pass her alongside these people. And so, I don't know. I feel kind of stuck, to be honest. So.
Yeah, I think that you speak for a lot of us. The fact is that we, as pastors, we never think we're doing enough. But what I found, though, is that I'm busier now during COVID than I was before. And that's taking away my transportation time or travel time. I was in every church every weekend. And I'm working longer days now, and sometimes work, I don't know what day I'm it is. So maybe it's just my age, and you guys are so young that doesn't affect you. EJ, how are you taking care of yourself during this time? This is a very isolated time. You're an extrovert, from what I can tell. How are you taking care of yourself? How are you keeping connected? How are you taking care of your family?
Oh, man. I think in many ways I have not been, to be honest. Like you said, we're almost busier. And I think a big part of that is access to me or whoever is easier. You have to just set up a Zoom call and boom, you're right there. But one thing that I did pick up in the past 2 weeks is yard work. I've never, I moved into this house a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and we've hired landscapers, but I mean, it's COVID-19. There's nothing else to do. So we stopped our landscaping service, and I picked it up, bought a lawnmower, all this stuff. And it's been very satisfying, just kind of, I'm a pretend farmer. So, my dream is to live on a self-sustaining farm eventually. And I think this is kind of giving me a taste of what that could be. I'm trimming plants, I'm pulling weeds, I'm doing all of it, and it's fun. And so I think I'm getting some nourishment through all that. Other than that, I mean, Netflix, YouTube, it's just being done with that stuff is helpful. So.
I don't do any yard work. I'm trying to break stereotypes of my community. How about you, Jay? How are you taking care of yourself? What's bringing joy to your life in the middle of all of this?
Yeah. Well, it was hard. At first, there was a good 2-3 weeks where my wife was not required to work because there was no sense of what would happen with the school system. And no one was prepared to move to e-learning yet at that time. So she was kind of just off work. Unfortunately, the daycare is closed. So that was very demanding and still is very demanding on us. And then I was in the transition, reading everything on the internet. So it was really hard first where, we just found ourselves kind of in this holding pattern for 2-3 weeks. And even though we still are in that, I think we've adjusted, but self-care probably has suffered. EJ and I both, and many others in our group of friends, practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So we love to, sweat and exercise and be present there physically and get all the stress out. But without that, because it's probably one of the least hygienic things to do, is like the best way to maybe transmit disease, transmit a virus to others. So all the gyms are closed and we can't do that kind of thing. So now one of the few things that we've learned to do is, number one, set good boundaries around media intake. At the beginning of Lent, I gave up cable news. Don't try to guess which networks I used to watch, but anyway, I don't watch any of them now. I watch local news now. But that was really important for me. And I think that probably protected me and is still protecting me from a lot of overload. And also setting good boundaries around social media, which is really necessary right now. But now the daily kind of respite has come in the form of getting in the car, taking the kids on Lakeshore Drive and driving up and down along the lake so that they can fall asleep. Hallelujah. And then my wife and I could actually talk in the car while drinking coffee. That has been one of the rhythms daily for us for a good 2 months now. And then really working on sleeping earlier, cutting off phone usage earlier. But it has been very difficult. We're learning on the go. And I'm reminded, I could say this among the three of you, there is a certain blessing in being like an immigrant and diaspora person where you are used to adjusting.
We are used to this, right?
We adjust. We're not used to having a lot. And one of the ways that we might not make the most of who we are is by getting so comfortable and assimilating in every way into all the creature comforts. So being uncomfortable, being a church plant, in a way, this is drawing out some of the best of who we are. But it took a while.
And worst.
Yeah, it took a while to find some workable rhythms,
I am waiting for both of you to get to a certain martial art level so that I can come in and give you a master class, and I can do that with you. And it's just amazing me. You guys are. I love the fact that you guys are so involved with that, and you two are two of the most gentle people that I know. So I just salute that.
We got to change that.
Let's keep it that way. Being Filipino Americans, I don't know if you have the same, most people don't understand that Filipinos and Latinos are very closely related, not only because we both have Spanish blood, but, we have a lot of the same traditions, and family is very important, high respect for elders. Being Philippine, so in Latin America, for example, I was born in Guatemala, but I was raised in Chicago. When I go to Guatemala, I am not really seen as a Guatemalan. I'm seen as an American. But here in the States, I am not really seen as an American. I'm seen as a foreigner. What has been your experience with being a Filipino American?
EJ can go first this time.
I go first. All of that, what you said, a cosign for the Filipino experience.
Yeah.
But it's very layered. I mean, one, being Filipino, you're Asian and Hispanic at the same time, and even growing up, it was hard to find a group to belong to. I mean, for the Asians, and by Asians I mean like Koreans and Chinese, it's like we're not Asian enough to be with them, and then
Right.
for our Latino brothers and sisters, we're too Asian to be Latino, and so we're in this weird middle space. And then yeah, when it comes to Filipino and American, we're in that level as well. We're in between. So yeah, here, like you said, we're the other, we're the outsider, and over there it's almost the same thing. Yeah, we look the part, but as far as culture and language, we're galaxies apart. And so which at the same time, in the broader conversation when it comes to reconciliation and George Floyd and the Black and white community, I think this is the space that God has prepared us for, to be in this middle space. And I'm excited to see where the Filipino American community could step up and fill in the gap. So yeah, it's complicated, but it's good.
And just like Jay said, we make it good because we don't really have any other choice.
We have no choice.
We kind of go with it, and we become very resilient people because of that. So, so I want you to know, when you and I are together, I don't. You're just my brothers. We have so much in common that, and I know a little Tagalog, so. Tagalog being the Filipino language, which
you probably know more than me.
I probably murder it really well. So how about you, Jay?
Yeah, like EJ mentioned, what happened to George Floyd, of course, is a tragedy, alongside what happened to Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and many, many others whose names we can no longer keep track of. So I just want to name that as something that is heartbreaking and unjust. And we must, especially as Christians and as pastors, be involved in speaking up about this and doing what we can to change the system. But for a lot of Filipino Americans, I've been getting a lot of phone calls and texts because a lot of my academic work is in this area. And I find that a lot of Filipino Americans are really being challenged to delve more deeply into their own ethnic identity right now, because we are hearing a lot of Asian Americans feeling very complicit in what happened to George Floyd or what was done to him, because they see in the Hmong American officer who stood by, Officer Tutao, and they see themselves. And I think there's room for that. And yet there's the falling into camps right now, politically and socially, but there isn't a clear sense of where Filipino Americans ought to be. So, like you said, if we go to the Philippines, we're treated or called as coconuts, right? Brown on the outside, but white on the inside. And then we come here, and then we're like siopao. Siopao is like this Filipino bun, but it's lighter on the outside, and then it's brown on the inside. But the Asian American experience is also one of being stereotyped as a perpetual foreigner. So we carry all these weird, and challenging layers. And I think some of the answer for it that I found is that we ought to really grow in understanding who we uniquely are. So my own, I don't consider myself an activist, but I believe pastors ought to engage in activism when called for. My own work in that field comes out of my own love for myself as a Filipino, really just knowing that God made me uniquely. And even though I can't quite find a category for that, I can embrace however he is present with me and with my Filipino American experience and community. And so my growth in solidarity with others is really coming out of that. And it's not right now for me about finding exactly where I would draw the line between being a Filipino American or being an American Filipino, being an Asian American or being like a Latino Asian. But I think right now it's just about leaning into all the resources that I can find that helped me to know how God is present in Filipino American community, and saying, God loves us. And if he loves us, he loves not just us, but he also wants us to celebrate his love for others, even if it means coming alongside them as they suffer.
I think, part of our identity as Filipinos, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in our culture that allows us to be adaptable and flexible. And, that lends to us finding solidarity with so many different groups. And, this one especially, I think there's a lot of even our own Blackness that allows us to walk alongside our actual Black brothers and sisters. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And most people don't understand that we have African blood too. I mean, there's African blood in the Philippines, there's African blood in Latin America. I myself, who I'm supposed to be a travel person. I was in Honduras in a island. I don't remember the name of the island, but it was 99% Afro-Latina. And I'm like, how is that possible? In Guatemala, we have a section that is purely African Latino, and so all the way along the Caribbean, all the way in the Atlantic to Brazil, which has a lot of African blood. I think it's we can certainly relate to pain. We can certainly relate to being marginalized, and I think you both spoke beautifully about how to have solidarity with our brothers and sisters who need it right now. I think that because we are afraid of, the law has not always been on our side. We're afraid of law enforcement. We're afraid of, in the Latino side of ICE, that we don't want to stir anything up, and we rather say, well, this has nothing to do with us, but it has something to do with us, and it has to do with anyone that can be marginalized. Changing gears a little bit, I remember, I don't quite remember how I met you, but I invited you to come to one of our midwinter events because, I have a certain affinity for Filipinos. I pastored Filipinos in San Diego, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I gained so much weight, with so much lumpia and pancit, and they were just amazing cooks. And of course, you cannot turn food down, otherwise you're the most rude person in the world. How did you come about the covenant, and why are you a part of the covenant now?
Okay, I'm going to jump in because I want to remind you, Pastor Danny, that you're still pastoring Filipinos in your care for us as pastors.
Yes, of course. But I haven't gotten any pancit or any lumpia lately, so that's the big difference, Jay.
That's Jay's fault. He's closer to you, so
I can't serve it via Zoom. Sorry, But I wanted to raise that because I think being in the covenant for me has been so refreshing, even though there are a lot of challenges around us.
Yeah.
And joining the covenant was really through relationships. My mentors, many of them were and are in the covenant, and even in the Central Conference, Dr. Peter Cha, Sun Chan Ra, and others, But I think if I could just say this to your credit, Reverend Danny, when in 2015, when the Laquan McDonald shooting the video of it was released, and the African American churches and community in Chicago were speaking out and expressing not only their pain and their outrage, but the desire, the need for systemic change. I marched alongside them at that time because I had been living in African American community in the South Shore neighborhood. I had been studying at McCormick Theological Seminary under, Black professors and alongside Black classmates. And when I brought those experiences to the denomination I was formerly a part of, so much of it was dismissed, and there was not a sense within the denomination of locking arms together as people who understand that Jesus himself is near to suffering and himself suffers with those who suffer.
Yeah.
So for me to have met you and be invited to come into several events, whether they were midwinter at that time or other gatherings, there was already instantly not only an ethnic and racial diversity that was lacking elsewhere, but there was the freedom that I had, that I did not have to explain myself. I didn't have to explain my experiences of being marginalized in white institutions. And I didn't have to defend myself when I felt dismissed, because that didn't happen to me. You know, I was simply just embraced, and we understood one another. And in every way that it was able to, I have seen the conference and the denomination try to put their action where their talk is. You know, right now there's so many statements coming out about, you know, we stand with the Black community and with Black lives. Before that, people were saying we stand with Asian Americans against the stereotypical racism. And statements are well and good. They're important, but they're not enough. And what is a more powerful statement to me is the kind of relationship that you and many others like you in leadership in the covenant are willing to have with me. So that has been most meaningful. And in times like this, where we need to have already had those relationships in place,
Yeah,
I'm able to draw on that. So I just want to say I really appreciate, you know, your work, and even the fact that you reached out to me and Pastor EJ to have this conversation, to amplify our voices and to give us this platform for a moment. I just want to share that with you and say thank you for giving us the freedom and the acceptance to not have to explain ourselves, but to simply say, like, you know what, we're suffering and we're together, then let's suffer together alongside others and lift them up.
thank you, Pastor Jay. You and EJ have made just an incredible addition to the Central Conference, and certainly the denomination, but I can speak more for the Central Conference, that we're better. We're better because you two are here, for sure. How about you, EJ?
My introduction to the ECCs, it was pretty long and drawn out. Jay, I'm not sure if you remember this, but so I was a student at Trinity with Jay. We were classmates, and I was in the MDiv program. But you know, 2009, I started getting really burnt out with the work, and so I transitioned the MDiv into an MA program. So I cut my studies short.
Oh, no.
Cut it short in 20.
We have a master of arts amongst us. You know, this interview is over.
Hold on. There's still more of the story.
Oh, there's still more. Oh, okay.
You should mute his microphone until.
Yeah. Mute me. But in 2010, I graduated. So Jay had his MDiv, I had my MA, became a pastor for a year, and then I had the itch for school again. And then Jay, you sent me this article or a video. You're like, EJ, check this out. Ended up being a video of Sung Chan Ra, and he was going off on Black issues and social justice. I'm like, man, what is this? But I really got attracted to that side of the gospel. So I dug a little deeper, found out he taught at North Park. So I'm like, you know what? Instead of going back to my previous institution, let's explore this. And so applied, went to North Park, finished out my MDiv. And so in those 2 years, see, Dan, I got him MDiv, all right?
And so, from North Park. Yeah.
From North Park, Park. So those 2 years of me going to North Park, that's how I discovered the ECC. I had no idea what it was. And it ended up being this really just cool place. Like, there are some sectors of evangelicalism where you have to believe 10 things, to belong. Sure. But the covenant really has space for a lot of different things. Like, obviously, we agree on the affirmations and all that stuff. But there is so much freedom to dissent and have your own views. And I just saw beauty in that, especially with me coming from a host of different backgrounds. Being Catholic and Protestant. The covenant just made so much sense for me and my community, and I just fell in love with her. So yeah, I mean, it's awesome. One big thing for me about the ECC was their affirmation of story and actual multi-ethnicity. It wasn't hi, we're white guys. We're going to co-opt you into our story. It was really, hey, let me affirm you. Let me listen to what it means to be a Filipino American. And that was the first time I felt that affirmation anywhere in all these different white spaces. And so
Wow.
That got me. So Danny, it worked.
It
We're
worked.
in. We're
Whatever
in.
whatever we did, it worked, right?
Yeah.
Well, no. Well, thank you for your trust too. And you're both deep thinkers in spite of the appearances. You're both very deep thinkers, and you're both just lovely men of God. We're very happy to have you among us. And I've been with the Covenant for 34 years. I started as a very young man, and this was a place. It was mainly an Anglo denomination. Swedish. Um, and I have seen it change. I've seen it transform, and I've seen the way that they have been intentional about multiculturalism. And we have paid some high price for that because multiculturalism it's messy. Especially when you value order, and our services were like so. We didn't waste any 1 minute. We did not waste in the worship service. And you had then someone like me leading worship, trying to make people dance and make them feel very uncomfortable. People danced anyway, just out of politeness, I think. But the Covenant has certainly shaped me, and I'm very grateful for that. And we're nowhere where we need to be. But our president makes a distinction. We're not a church with multicultural ministries. We are a multicultural denomination. And that may seem scary to some, but the only way that this doesn't seem scary to people is if they know who EJ is, if they know who Jay is, if they know your churches, if they know the incredible ministry that you're doing. And I want to highlight that as much as we can, because that is the kingdom of heaven for us. We are better together. And we eat better too. So
Man, can't wait for that.
well, we definitely need to make a date and go have some Puerto Rican food in Humboldt Park as soon as this is
Let's
done.
do it.
Because Puerto Rican food is from the Lord.
Yeah.
Amen.
Lord's food.
So what is your hope for, you're in the Covenant Church now. What is your hope for your church and henceforth for the conference and for our denomination? What is your hope for what's coming? This has been a really rough year with COVID. A lot of our people have suffered by that. But in the middle of all of that, we've also seen the hand of God, and God has provided for us, and God continues to do what He's doing. What do you hope to accomplish this year through your church? What do you see the Central Conference becoming? What are your hopes and dreams about any of those things?
I'll share because I'm probably going to forget sooner than EJ would. But something that he said, I would echo, that this being 2020, not only already in a very, very unique set of circumstances, but knowing that it's an election year. I was not in the Covenant during 2016, but in fact, was in another space where I felt very, very isolated. And I am right now hoping for our church and for the Covenant, but also for my own leadership to come out from this year more committed to Jesus and His mission and His love for all kinds of people than we were last year. I say that because there are so many polarizing forces that creep into and affect the church. And my church is also very diverse, theologically, politically, socially, economically, ethnically, etc. And in no way do I want to say that the church should be a place where it should be monolithic in any of those aspects. But I know that the Covenant has brought to us strength to draw closer to Jesus Christ together in ways that lean into what matters most, and that then enable us to disagree. So what I want this year is that, that with the covenant's help and even learning from so many great partners, so many great leaders in different areas of discussion, that we can say after 2020 is over, that whether it was COVID, whether it was our struggle to get better involved in the work of racial justice, whether it was figuring out how to navigate another election where social media and so many other things are weaponized, that we were in a community of people who were able to say, you know what, we clung more closely to Jesus this year. And because of that, even though we are different and we respect some of those differences, we're going to be further into discipleship and look more like him when this year is over.
Amen to that.
And Jay, you mentioned that 2016 was also an election year. 2020 is one. And before we planted, I preached a sermon, and it's very scary how I could just replace names. So in 2016, the Philando Castile, Anton Sterling, all that stuff happened. And I listened to it again just recently, and I could just remove those names and put George Floyd in it. Yeah. I could preach it today. And that breaks my heart that, I mean, it's only 4 years, right? And people have been preaching about this forever, but it just breaks my heart that some people are in the same place they were 2016, kind of unsure on where they land on this race issue. And like Jay said, I know there's going to be different perspectives, but at least for my own community and, the broader Filipino community, I want us to start thinking about how all these racial issues, social issues are part of the gospel and not just some faraway peripheral thing. And that's just my hope, that we have a more robust view of what Jesus Christ came to do, right? Not just this ticket to heaven thing, but really establishing justice here on earth. And I know that's a large task, but we're doing, bit by bit. And I think 2020, for some reason, I think there's going to be more real growth. I don't know. It's the George Floyd thing was just different. And yeah. I hope we just build upon 2016 and just go into it alongside the covenant and, continue these conversations and actions. So.
Yeah. Those, we have 111 churches in the Central Conference. 20 of them are African American. And most of the losses that we've experienced go along with the demographic loss in Chicago. Most of the deaths and layoffs and all have happened in the African American community in our churches. And we have 12 Asian American churches. We have 8 multicultural churches, including yours. We have 10 Latina churches, and the majority of our churches are majority churches, middle, upper class, suburban, or town and country. And more than ever, I've seen a spirit of unity in wanting to love our neighbor and love ourselves. We have our previous superintendent is African American. I am Latino, and the fact that I am the first Latino to serve in this role it's something great. It speaks highly of who the Central Conference is and how we want things to be more inclusive. You two are very important to that, and your voices are very important to that. So I want to always encourage you to speak up, to be present, to let us know when we can do better, because we're not beyond reproach. We need to have accountability just like everyone else, and we count on you as our young and upcoming superstars, just like I started this interview, to hold us accountable to that and to speak truth to power and speak to, and thankfully we have a relationship. We don't really have to speak truth to power. You can just talk to your friend and let us know how we can be not only have solidarity for our Asian American brothers and sisters, as well as our African American brothers and sisters, and anyone that's experiencing injustice. We welcome that, and we're very grateful for you, for your families, and for all that you will bring still to the covenant in this years to come. So thank you so much for your time today. Our time is done.
Thank you.
And so next time when we do that with lumpia in front of us, maybe we can do another half hour. But for
Let's
now,
do it.
this is it. Thank you so much. May God be with both of you, and you're both loved. Your families are loved, and please greet your communities for me.
Thank you. Likewise.
Amen.